Hi everybody, welcome to the Farm and Country podcast. This is episode 8, and in this episode I'm going to be talking about how to find land, how to get your hands on a piece of land. Whether you rent it or own it, I'm going to help you find it. So just a quick note, this is the very first regular, normal Monday podcast, and I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. Mondays is always going to be about a topic. So every Monday you can expect to hear a podcast episode about one of the 5 topics that I previously went through on the first 7 episodes of the Farm and Country podcast. So that's going to be Monday. Wednesday I'm going to try and bring you an article, and then Friday will sort of just be a mishmash of different things. So today, we're talking about rural living and country living, and I thought, what better way to get started in rural and country living than to talk about how to actually get out to the country. So, I have listened to many hundreds of people. Okay, that's an exaggeration. Let's say a half a dozen, maybe a little more than half a dozen. I've had that many people come up and tell me, oh yeah, I would love to live in the country, man. And I know they're being sincere, and I've even have friends of mine who are actively seeking country acreages. I don't think they're looking for it for the same reason that we are, but I know that no matter what, their ultimate plan is, they want to get out of the city. And if you're that person, this podcast is for you, especially this episode, because the biggest hurdle to doing anything is taking the first step, right? I mean, how many people talk about starting a business? I have had dozens of people tell me about starting a business. I've had one guy tell me about 5 different businesses that he wants to start. And every time it's like, well, how come you're not actually doing that? And I don't actually ask him this because I'm not interested in starting some kind of deep philosophical conversation, but I always wonder to myself, why it is that people talk about good things and they don't do anything about it. Well, okay, I don't have an answer for you on that one, but I do know that I was not the person to sit around and talk about it and never do anything about it. I finally got so sick of living in the city environment that I just, I went to my wife and I said, I can't do this anymore. Can we please move to the country? And my darling wife, to her everlasting credit, did not immediately veto that request. She actually agreed to it. And I've said before how I love my wife. I do. I absolutely do. She agreed to something that she really didn't have all that much interest in. It was not her idea to move to the country. It was not her dream. My wife is interested in pretty dresses and, antique-looking furniture, stuff like that. She has no interest in raising chickens and goats and seeing lambs born. That's just it's not her thing. So for me, the fact that she agreed to that was an indicator of how much she trusted and loved me. And I think that trust and love is still there, even after just about 9 years out here in the country. And I think it's stronger than ever. But without that agreement, I probably wouldn't have done it. But, once I had secured my wife's go ahead, the thumbs up, the whole question of, okay, well, what now? Where do we move? And I had a good idea of what I wanted. I didn't want to move into an already established house because I already knew from that point that I wanted to heat with wood, that I wanted to be off the grid. I wanted to be as independent as I possibly could. Now, back then I was I will confess this to you. I thought the world was going to end in like 5 years or something like that. So I was getting ready for the end of the world. And now, I don't know what's going to happen. I just prepare for tomorrow. And, you know, like it says in the Bible, let every day be its own day. Let tomorrow worry about itself. So I worry enough about today. I don't need to be worried about whether the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow. You know, if there's going to be a nuclear bomb attack because Korea is spouting a bunch of nonsense again. You know, if there's going to be some kind of biological weapon attack. I don't know. Will the power go out? I honestly don't know. All I can tell you is that I just wanted to get out of the city. I wanted to have an adventure. I wanted to live a little bit different life. And so that was driving me. So I wanted to be able to grow my own food. So that requires, you know, it requires a little bit more than an acre. That's at least was my guess. And I'd pegged about 3 acres to be the minimum. So if you don't know what an acre is about 210 feet on each side. And it's a pretty big piece of land if you're judging by the size of, a house. It's much, much bigger than a normal house. And even large mansions probably wouldn't cover a full acre. If you've got a house that covers an acre, then I don't know how you possibly could clean that, because that's just way too much house for anybody. I wouldn't want a house that big, because then I got to sweep the floor. But 1 acre is good size. 2 acres is even better, and I wanted 3 as a minimum, because I wanted to plant trees and I wanted to plant berry bushes and shrubs and stuff like that. I wanted to have a little utopia, you know, an edible forest. I wanted chickens and maybe a cow or something like that. I wanted just to be able to manage my own lifestyle without having to rely too much on the grocery store. And I still absolutely want all of that. But I now have far, far, far more land than I ever thought I would be in possession of. And it was kind of an accident how I came across it. So our original plan to buy land, I tried a few things. And I still recommend that you look into these kinds of things, because depending on the area that you live in, it might work. In my case, it was just far easier to buy a huge piece of land that was further away than I had initially anticipated or expected it to be. Initially, I was looking to buy something that was, half an hour away, maybe 45 minutes away, because, I still planned to continue working in the city, and I still work in the city. Not that I plan to continue doing that for much longer. If I can get out of shift work, I will. Even if it's just to get to a different job, maybe a daytime job, something that's closer, that's kind of the plan. But I wanted something that was close. And so I only really looked at close pieces of land. But I didn't necessarily shut down the idea of leaving my local area. I looked at pieces of land in other towns, and I even applied for jobs in other towns. And I was disappointed I didn't get those jobs, so I obviously didn't move there. But, I probably would have been just as happy moving to another small town. I got family living in a town called Medicine Hat. There was a job there that I could have probably gotten. I got pretty close to getting it, and I just didn't get it. So we didn't end up moving there. One of the things that I did try was I was looking to maybe rent a piece of land. And I put an ad out in the, I don't even remember where I put the ad. I might have put it in the newspaper for all I can remember. This was in the days before Kijiji. Although I think Kijiji started kind of ramping up a little bit after that, because this was maybe 9 years ago. I think that's been around for that long. If you don't know what Kijiji is, it's like Craigslist. Here in Canada, Kijiji is way bigger than Craigslist, and it's way better. And I highly recommend, if you're looking for a piece of land, look on Kijiji. So the first thing that I did is I just sat down at the computer and I just typed in Alberta land for sale. And I just started parsing through every listing I could find. And I was mentally, preparing how far away would I be prepared to live. And so I mapped out kind of a circle around the city of Calgary, and I said, well, anything within this circle is a good prospect, and anything outside of it, I drew another circle that was about 45 minutes away, and I said, this is the maybe prospect. And then I even looked at other towns, and I said, well, maybe I can get a job in this town, and that would open up the land around that little smaller city as being a possibility. I mean, I was very, very motivated to do this. And my motivation was driving me to look at options that I don't know if I would have taken them if I'd had the opportunity, but I was definitely looking at some very, very long prospects here. I think I even looked at land in the United States. That's how desperate I was. Or I don't say desperate, but motivated. You see, I've always been a very driven kind of person, and so my motivation drives me to look at every option. That's kind of the person I am. And if you want to move to the country and you want to live that dream life, doing what I'm doing, building and trying things out, raising your own food, you've just got to open up your mind and say, what am I willing to do? And can I push that boundary a little bit? Because you never know what you're going to find. And the moral of my story is that I ended up finding the perfect piece of land. And I say it's perfect because I really do believe that it's perfect. It's perfect because it meets the needs of future me. And it's capable of not just providing a home and an area for us to live in, a couple acres for us to do a few things, but it's room to expand into and start making money now. And that was not something that I had sort of planned into this from the beginning. I hadn't planned on making any money doing this. I just wanted to try out the homesteading lifestyle. I wanted to just do my own thing. And of course I say I because I was the driving person behind it. And I was hoping that my wife would kind of get on board, and she has. She's definitely on board with the lifestyle that we're living, but she's not as driven to it as I am. Sometimes, and that's usually how it goes, guys. I'll tell you, usually it's going to be one or the other person that's more motivated to do this. And then you've got the task of convincing your significant other or your whole family in some cases, hey, we should leave this fairly easy life in the city and go move out to a hard place in the country. And I'll tell you, it's an uphill battle sometimes. And I think that'll probably end up being the topic of another day's podcast, which would be fantastic, talking about convincing your family, to follow your dream and see if they'll go along with it. And what to do if they don't, because there are some ways that you can get around if they don't want to do that. So, one day, I was just looking on the MLS, and it used to be called the MLS, the Multiple Listing Service, and now it's called something different. It's called Realtor.com. Anyway, it's the place where all real estate agents list properties for sale. And you can search by property type, you can search by land size, you can search by location. It really is probably the best way to find a piece of land. And for, I would say, 70% of people, that'll be the way that you find your piece of land. And we ended up, I expanded my search. I was just looking at pieces of land, and I had a price range in mind, but I didn't have the size of the land because, I was kind of keeping my options open at that point. And so this listing popped up, and it was $135,000. That was well within the sort of price range that I had mentally established. One of the problems with the land near cities is that it's way, way, way more expensive than it has any right to be. A quarter section that is 160 acres that's right next to a major city, especially if that city is growing and is prosperous, not dying. Maybe Chicago farmland can go for cheap, but here in Canada, farmland that's next to a city is very, very, very expensive. Millions of dollars. Even if it's a small city, you could easily get up to $1 million and maybe more for a quarter section that's directly next to any kind of suburban area. Because, these cities, they grow over time, and that piece of property eventually will be swallowed up, which is what you don't want, by the way. You don't want your property to eventually become row houses. So, that was kind of a factor too. I didn't want to get too close to the city. And of course, I wanted trees. I wanted nice rolling hills. I wanted a bunch of, if I could have gotten a pond, that would have been awesome. But in the end, I said, you know what? Give me dirt and grass and I'll be happy. And the rest can come later. You can dig a pond, you can plant trees, you can build roads, you can put in berry bushes, you can do anything you want to land, within reason, of course. You're not going to build a 7-acre pond unless you have, some kind of crazy earth-moving equipment. But, over time, you can build these things into your property, making it more valuable as you go. And I knew that just finding that piece of land was going to be the biggest challenge. So, I put up ads. And one of the things that I tried was, I put up targeted ads. And by targeted, I said, hey, farmers, sell me some land. We're looking to buy land. We're looking to subdivide land from somebody who owns land. Hit me up. I'll give you a good price for it. We will pay you good money for land. Just give us a chance. Subdivide us 10 acres. I was kind of looking at 10 acres. And I didn't know then, but subdivisions are actually quite difficult to do. And it's not because people don't want to subdivide their land. There are definitely farmers out there that if they, there are lots of farmers that own marginal, kind of less productive land. As a matter of fact, I'm driving by some of that marginal land right now, the kind with standing water and weeds, and you can just tell it hasn't been farmed. The combine or the farmer just skips it. He doesn't even seed it. It's not worth it. And I was looking for something like that. And if it weren't for the government, generally speaking, land like that could easily be purchased from farmers. They would happily subdivide out their garbage land and sell it to somebody who could intensively work that land and make it more productive. And I think in a true free market, you would see that kind of thing happening all over the place. But we have a system of land ownership here in North America generally. I'm not blaming my local county for this. They're not the ones who came up with this. It's just a thing that all of governments have decided that they need to be in control of what land is used for. And governments have decided that small pieces of land are bad for some reason. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense to me, but tiny subdivided pieces of land, they don't like that. So if you own a piece of land and you're trying to subdivide out, 3 acres to put someone else's house on or something like that, you're probably not going to be able to do it unless, and there is an exemption here, there is a quarter section with a house already on it. You can usually subdivide the house and 3 or 4 acres off the quarter. And this is an exemption made for retiring farmers so that they can sell their productive land and just live in the same house. And we found a piece of land that had been done to it. So the house was actually for sale separately, and I didn't find, well, it wasn't at the time, and it became for sale later. But it was a terrible house, and I wouldn't have bought it even if I had seen it right off the bat. It was crap. But this piece of land that we did buy used to be all one piece with the house, and it was subdivided off and fenced off, and they sold the rest of the quarter section. And generally speaking, on a big piece of land, you're allowed to put one house on it. And this was kind of another thing we had been looking to do. I haven't mentioned this part of the story, but we had been in sort of talks with another family to kind of do this move jointly, and to put two houses on the same property and sort of share some of the utilities, which in retrospect probably wouldn't have worked very well. And when we did try it, it worked not at all. But, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And we're still good friends with that family, and I know that they're still looking for their acreage. They're still looking for their land in the country, and they haven't found it yet. But actually, I just saw them today, and they mentioned that they're going to look at a few places. So I really hope and pray that they do find it. But the idea of buying a piece of land and splitting it in half is probably not going to happen in most jurisdictions. The government will just not let you do it. The same goes with finding somebody who will subdivide marginal land and sell it to you for the purpose of building sort of a lifestyle acreage. The government will not allow that. The subdivision committee will probably shoot you down. Now, that doesn't mean that you're out of luck, guys, because it just so happens that, these pieces of land that have already been subdivided are all over the place. They're all over the place. And you just have to keep looking. So, what is the best place to look? Well, as I mentioned before, you've got to hit the multiple listing service, or whatever it's called now, realtor.ca or .com. Keep hitting that thing. Keep looking. I think you can set up alerts that will tell you if something pops up on there that fits your criteria, but always do a manual search, because sometimes the category that you're trying to look in will have odd, misplaced listings in it. And I'm not sure, but I think that's how we found our piece, is that we were looking for land. I did a search for land that was under 50 acres, and this one popped up. So never stop searching. Just keep searching. And always be ready to go out and look at something at short notice, because I don't know if you talk to other people, if you are just new to this idea of moving out to the country, but it's by no means an unpopular idea. There are lots of people who would love to find a piece of land. And if it's a good piece of land, especially in today's climate of high land prices, these things just don't last very long. Although they do last longer depending on where they are. If you're willing to move out into some, rural area, you probably will find something that is quite suitable. And if you find it, you can probably take your time and just keep an eye on it. And you're probably thinking, well, I can't really do that because I can't earn a living. Well, that's not true. That is definitely not true. In today's climate, it is easy for anybody to earn a living remotely. But we're not here to talk about that today. Just remember that location is not as important as it used to be in this modern internet era. And keep your mind open. Some people have already got telecommuting systems, and man, that's an awesome job to have. I wish I could telecommute to my job, but unfortunately, It's the kind of job that requires my physical presence at the actual work location. So it doesn't really work like that. But if you are telecommuting, then, I mean, your options are wide open, basically. It's just the availability of schools and how close you are to services that would probably dictate where you want to go. So keep checking that multiple listing service or realtor.com. Also keep running searches on every ad site that exists. I honestly don't know how many sites are out there. It's been a long time since I've done searches like this. There are some sites that do land only, and the only way to find them is to just keep searching. So open up your browser and open up Google or Yahoo or whatever. If you're kind of slow in the head and you like to use Bing, that's okay. You know, someday you'll be a real boy and you can use Google or Yahoo, but just do a quick search. And here's some keywords to look for: land for sale, farmland, vacant land. Let's see what else here. Yeah, acreages. That would probably be a couple of the major keywords. You're going to find most of your results in those keywords, and any associated keywords, you know, you can type in acreage plus for sale. You can type in vacant land plus for sale plus for rent. That's another thing I want to talk about is renting something. Rental rates these days for land are often very, very reasonable. And the reason that rental rates for land are reasonable is that very few people actually want to rent an acreage, especially if it's in a small area. If it's next to a major city, yeah, the rental rates are going to be pretty high. But if you're renting near a small town, and that small town has any kind of services, well, the rental rates are probably going to be the same, excuse me, for a house in the town as it is for an acreage outside of town. And the acreage has the advantage of being land. So if you're like, well, I can't afford to buy a piece of land, you know, land prices are really expensive, you know, I can't afford $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 an acre. Well, you know, renting something is definitely an option. And if you say to yourself, well, let's rent and maybe someday I'll own, renting kind of gets you ready for that eventual ownership. And if you get out there and you're like, you know what, I hate this. I can't stand being so far away from traffic lights and people honking their horns and stealing my wheelbarrow out of my driveway. I just got to get back to the city. You haven't lost anything. You've just tried something and it didn't work, right? And who cares? You tried it, you didn't like it. And maybe your family says, you know what, I don't think we can do this. We know we need to be mobile. We can't buy something because then we'll be tied down. You know, you're a perfect candidate for renting. You should consider renting. Usually, you will not find rental properties that include very much land, but even a couple of acres is basically freedom. You can do a lot with a couple of acres, and it's very unusual to rent a property that has a couple of acres and doesn't allow a garden and wouldn't allow you, well, where the property owner would say, well, no, you can't keep any chickens or anything like that. And you know what, if the property owner says no gardens, no chickens, move on, find a different one. There are lots of them out there, or at least in my area there are, and you don't lose anything by shopping around. So sometimes, though, unfortunately, your small parcel will be zoned and they won't allow farm animals to be kept on it, which is kind of a regrettable and stupid restriction, because who cares if someone has a couple of chickens running around on their 2-acre parcel? Like, only a jerk would complain about their neighbor having chickens. Someone who has lived in the city and cannot shed themselves of that mindset, that's the kind of person who complains about that. And you know what, there are those people out there, and they kind of suck, but you know, there's ways to deal with them. Maybe we'll talk about that. That's a great topic. Yeah, what to do about city neighbors living in the country. So one last thing I'll talk about when you're looking for land. There's a not very well known a method, I guess you could call it, of obtaining property, and it's not an easy way to do things, but it's worth looking into because depending on where you are and how many different tiny little parcels of property are out there, in my county there are I don't know how many different parcels there are, but it's a very big county. It's a huge county. It's all agriculture, but there are some sections that are kind of split. You know, anytime a railroad goes through, you get these little chunks, and farmers don't always want to keep those chunks, or sometimes they hold on to the chunk just because they don't know what else to do with it, and nobody else will buy it, or they just don't want to sell it, or they can't be bothered to sell it. And sometimes they'll forget to pay the taxes on it, or something like that. I'm not sure what causes people to not pay their property taxes, but I do know for a fact that if you don't pay your property taxes, the municipality will come and seize your property. Now, I think that's kind of a harsh way to do things, but they usually, I mean, here in Alberta, they give you 3 years to pay your taxes, and they're usually pretty good about kind of warning you and, you know, working with you to get those taxes paid. It's not like the bank where if you don't pay, you know, they start foreclosing on you right away. But after 3 years, they will absolutely sell that property out from underneath you. They will do it. And it's called a tax sale. And I've been to a few of these tax sales, and they actually, at least the ones that I've been to, they have an auction style way of doing things. So they start taking bids. And the one I was at, nobody bid on anything, and the land just went into the possession of the town or the municipality, and I don't know what they did with it, but it's always worth sort of paying attention. You can usually find tax sale listings. Again, just search tax sales. Okay, so search tax sales, and sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they'll even tell you the kind of property that they're selling, how big it is, whether it has a house on it, you know, where it is. You can go take a look at it, and they usually do this ahead of time, several months in advance, but be warned, at the same time, the property owner can come and pay the taxes up until, I think, including the day of the auction at a certain time. So, you know, be prepared that if you're looking at a nice, cool piece of property, that the tax sale won't happen because the property owner will be like, oh, crap, no, you can't take that away from me. Here's the tax. And they'll just pay the tax. But, you know, I think there are instances where they don't, and I have actually seen that happen. The tax sale that I went to, it had a 2-acre parcel. It was not a very good parcel, and the house was crap, but it ended up being sort of repossessed, I guess you could call it. They seized it. And unfortunately, I don't know. A lot of people think that tax sales, that all you do is pay the arrears and taxes. I've never seen that happen. I don't believe that they would ever do that because, you know, maybe some places they would. I could be wrong. I mean, every county in the U.S. seems to have their own rules about doing things. But here in Canada, I've never seen a tax sale where the property wasn't sold for somewhere in the neighborhood of market value. So, you know, be prepared that you're not just going to be able to walk in there, pay the taxes, and own the property. There might be special circumstances where that is the case, and if you find that, then consider yourself blessed. because that is pretty rare. But, even if you got to pay for your dream property, who cares? Having land is worth owning. Land is an investment that is going to increase in value. Even if it doesn't increase in monetary value, your property doesn't go up in dollar value, your land is an asset that is always going to be an asset. Unless, a meteor strikes the earth and splits the sucker in two, land will always have value. You can always live on it. You can always use it for farming and gardening. You can always, fall back to it if something happens. And so if you own a piece of land with a crappy old house on it that you wouldn't live in unless you absolutely had to, you still own something valuable. Because if something happened, God forbid, I don't believe, that we're looking at something like that in the next little while, but a personal crisis. Personal crises happen all the time. Maybe the end of the world isn't near, but you could lose your job. And you might have to move to that crappy little house in the country and become the subject of every horror movie ever written. Yeah. As you're lying in your bed and listening to the creak of this old house. Yeah, I don't think that's a usual thing that happens, but it's kind of a funny thought. So it is, land is an asset, so be prepared to pay for it. Most people who own land, they know what they've got, and they're not going to let it go for a song and dance and a puppet show. They're going to want some real hard currency. And, your hard currency will go a long way in the future. Pony up now and, sing happy tunes later. So I think that's about it for buying land. I have by no means exhausted the subject, but I'm hoping that was at least a reasonable sort of hit the topic on the head and get it going. So again, we're on this podcast 3 days a week. You can find us on the internet, www.farmandcountrypodcast.com. Find us there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So thanks for listening, guys, and good night.